Greetings ladies and gents, welcome back to the Craft Hammer. I'm your host Stefan, and in today's video, similar as before, we're going to do quick short tutorials on little things about the hobby to help you, the new beginner, get to grips with some of the things that you may have to come across. Hopefully you can switch in between these videos, pick out the thing that is bothering you and find that information as quickly as possible. Before we move on to further, make sure to subscribe, really helps us out, and don't forget to drop us a comment and a like. In today's video, we're going to talk quick and short about sub-assembly. As you may have seen from our first video, I did not put the backpack onto this Primaris Pyroblaster. Why exactly is that? In certain scenarios, when you're painting, the angle and the ability of moving your paintbrush, you're not going to be able to get at every crevice. Some things will be hidden behind parts. In this scenario, the backpack, I found that for most Space Marines, slightly blocks that area, and also, ironically enough, on the backpack itself, which then leaves little gaps where the primer can still be seen and you won't be able to effectively get it without ruining other parts of the paint. So how far do you need to go for this sub-assembly? Can you do the front arms? Of course you can if you really want to get to the detail, but in reality most parts here will be accessible. And another trick that you can do for a place like here, you can just put black primer in there, which makes it much easier to hide certain aspects. Of course, priming something depends on what you're going to be doing on the paint on top. If you're doing something bright like yellow, you generally want to have a pretty bright primer and not go black. But you can hide certain aspects of a model, and this is what I'm going to be discussing here, why I've done certain sub-assemblies. For example, this apothecary here that I've converted from the Blood Angels into a Black Templar, why I decided to drill it and put a pin in its leg is because, as you can see, it has a cloak that's attached. Now technically I'm sure I could have left it in some pieces, but if I then primed it and painted it and then eventually had to glue it, it most likely would have been a bit more hassle than what I'm currently doing here. What I plan to do is spray black primer inside here. I will of course paint as much as possible, but before getting into too much of the details, I will cut this pin and then simply glue it into its base itself. There's not that much of a sub-assembly if you think about it. It's no different than this model except one more step. It doesn't have its backpack, and I drilled a tiny pin so that once I fix that little part of the cloak that's hidden there and get that painted to a satisfactory level, of course it literally does not need that much detail, quick cut and glue onto its base. So not that much sub-assembly there. Now when it comes to Helbrecht here, he does have a lot more detail, and if I just pull a few things off, his two assistants do come off easily enough. Again, they are hiding a lot of detail. Helbrecht's sword comes off just because of the angle of where it is, making sure that it looks nice. I will have to take this off. Luckily enough, the connection point at the arm isn't too bad, so I should be able to, once it's fully painted, just put a tiny bit of glue there and put it on his actual arm. So it's not too bad to take this off. And do I need to sub-assembly even more? Technically you can. As you can see, there is a huge cloak that is hiding a lot of detail around the body itself. Even here, if I was to try and paint inside, it would be very difficult. So technically I could have, except the only problem is when it comes to cloaks, as I discussed in the gluing episode, we do have a seam on this side here. So if I had left it unglued, that seam would have been more pronounced than it is now, where I have managed to kind of melt part of it and make sure that you're not able to see as much. In this scenario, what am I going to do? It's going to be simple enough. I'm going to spray as much black paint in those crevices as possible. Those will be in shadow as much as possible, and then I will paint the armor itself, and you won't even notice that parts of the cloak in these little crevices are not painted, because the way the model itself is positioned and how it looks, you will not realize that there are parts that are actually not painted. So we're using sub-assemblies but also strategically we're using painting to hide those crevices. Priming them black will create shadows. Some things obviously you need to get into, hence why we've removed his little helpers so we can paint around the base itself. And we will remove Halbert himself because he is standing over the orc and hiding quite a few details there. So not too much. It's not that different than the apothecary in reality. It is a step or two more, but we're not getting in such a granular thing when it comes to sub-assemblies where every single bit here is going to be broken up. I have seen it happen. You can go into too many sub-assemblies and people like to break up far too much, and then guess what happens? They still need to glue it together. Glue gets onto the paint, they still rub things off. Not much has been fixed or not much has been saved by going to such a granular level, and they have to go back and repaint things anyway. Make sure you are being strategic when it comes to sub-assemblies, and of course using your priming wisely. There are certain parts that you can put in shadow, so don't worry too much if you can't get to it even after you've done a sub-assembly like this. That is the basics there. It will help you get into little crevices that you wouldn't be able to if you were using your paintbrush. The angle itself was too much for it to go. Now remember that not every detail needs to be super clear. There will be little bits like here at the chest where you won't be able to see anyway when you're playing, so I don't need to take this gun off. I've seen people do that as well. If you want, you can, but again, you're still going to be hiding that detail when you're putting the gun back on. Be strategic, don't do it too much. Make sure you're priming at the same time strategically when it comes to your sub-assemblies, and you should be fine. Hopefully this has helped you out. If you have any questions, make sure to drop them down below. Don't forget to like this video, really helps us out, and subscribe. Our next one, we're going to get some things primed and we're going to go on doing some basic paints on my theme, and hopefully I'll help you out with getting things painted. So until next time, take care folks.